Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 56, recorded February 2021. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan. We learn their Star Trek story. We try to figure out why this show means so much to them, to us, and to all of you. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 56. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Spoiler warning, as we record this, we have reached the end of Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, so all previous content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, Human. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the quietly quiescent, quintessentially contemplative, yet qualitatively cagey M5 Multitronic unit. Greet the listeners, M5.
M5 standing by. All functions within acceptable parameters.
Let's do the announcements, M5.
Communications displayed.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is to subscribe via your preferred podcasting platform. Now, very careful listeners may have noticed a slight degradation in my audio quality over the past few episodes, things like a slight audio crackle and stuff like that, and it's because, after extensive troubleshooting, that my mixer was failing, so it took me a while to figure that out. So I deep-sixed the old Behringer, and I bought a Focusrite Scarlett Solo, so in the intros and outros there might be a little bit better feel to the audio. It'll take a little while for the interviews to catch up, though, because of my long production pipeline. And speaking about equipment and all of that, in episode 50, I had promised a listener to make a blog post about how I make this show, and that has been posted on my site if you have an interest in reading about how we make the Hasbrat up in here. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes if anyone has an interest. Now, as I am recording this introduction, I have just come back from the 55-year mission, also known as STLV, and I just want to say that I always enjoy the panels, the actors, the other creatives, the fun events that they put on for us, but speaking for myself, what I most enjoyed was the chance to hang out with you, Star Trek people. Whether it was just sitting in the main theater and watching guests goofing off in Jimmy's Place, which is what Quark's Bar is now, enjoying the off-the-wall stuff in the smaller theaters, or just hanging around the masquerade till the wee hours, all of you made it the best time ever. So for all of my Trek friends, old and new, thank you for being so wonderful. The thing that made it a little different this year was missing all of my old Trek friends that I didn't get a chance to see. So I just wanted to put this in the show to say I was thinking about all of you, and I hope to see you soon, and we can geek out together. May Threll bless you all. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you choose. Time to review the lightning round questions from episode 52 with Mark Cushman. At the end of each episode, I ask my guests some multiple choice questions, and then after each episode posts, I tweet those out at polls on Twitter, so let's see how this one came out. Take a ride on the USS Constellation or the USS Exeter? Mark expertly expected the Exeter to be the excellent choice, but in the poll, the Constellation was deemed the more stellar choice by 79 to 21%. Hang out with Sulu in the botany lab or Scotty in the engine room? Flora failed to fully engage my faithful listeners, and both Mark and the Twitter people said engineering by 54 to 46%. Who's worse, John, Gill, or Kodos? Mark was set upon John, but the Twitter people from coast to coast said it wasn't close, and 69 to 31% chose Kodos. Choose your first Starfleet assignment, patrolling the Gorn border or the Tholian border. Mark said Gorn, and on Twitter in general, the Gorn gained a galactic 75 to 25% advantage. And finally, have a beverage, Tranya or the Georgia Mint Julep. My guest picked the Tranya, and on Twitter, they relished it as much as he by a 60 to 40% margin. Now, just so you know, the M5 and I do not write all of the lightning round questions. Listeners such as yourselves, yes, that's right, you, can submit them to me. There's a post up on my website where I talk a little bit about what we're looking for and some of the rules for these lightning round questions. And if your question makes it onto the show, you will get a shout out and a credit on the show notes page on the website. And in fact, there are some listener submitted questions used in this very episode. So listen until the end for those questions and the credits. That's it for news, messages, and communiques. Let's move on. M5, run the intelligence profile for this week's guest, and let's start the show.
M5 acknowledges.
His favorite character is Dr. McCoy, and his favorite ship from Star Trek is the Doomsday Machine. What the what? He loves Spock, but he also really enjoys the Lactrans. Man, that's a deep cut. And you can find his Star Trek-themed books on sale everywhere. He's from Cambridge, England, on Earth, in Sector 001. It's Glenn Dakin. Welcome, Glenn, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Glenn, are you a Star Trek fan?
Yes.
And when was the first point in your life that you realized you were a Star Trek fan?
Do you know, I think I was a Star Trek fan before I had even seen Star Trek because I used to have two friends at school who'd seen it before me, because in the UK in the early 70s, it was very hard to get to see it at one point. And they would tell me about it in the school playground, about how they used to travel from planet to planet and every week. Because in the UK, the shows were so low budget that have you heard of Doctor Who?
Yes, of course.
Well, in Doctor Who, if they had an alien planet, the story would go on for 6 weeks because they wouldn't be able to afford to buy any new sets, So I couldn't believe there was this show where there was a different planet every week, and I heard all about beaming up and beaming down. I was like, first of all, I thought they were having me on. I thought this is like a wind up. This show doesn't really exist. So I was very pumped up because I loved science fiction, and there was a real dearth of science fiction on UK television at the time. So, I immediately fell in love with it. I finally got to see it on my little black and white telly at home. And, I was watching reruns at that stage. They were already reruns of the original series.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you'd seen reruns of the original series, and I imagine that it must have lived up to your expectations because you continued to watch it.
I mean, I was absolutely staggered by it, really. I mean, in fact, I was I won't say heartbroken, but I was very disappointed when they redid the special effects on the original series, for... They created new...
The remasters?
Yeah, because I thought the original effects were so artfully done and they were so much part of my memory of the show that I was really quite disappointed when they changed them, because I just thought the show was stunning. It was so original and so tight. It was like like Bilko. It was like a comedy where there was no wasted material. It was all very tightly done, and the fact that it created its own world with its own jargon, its own catchphrases, its own way of talking. I mean, the moment you start seeing Mr. Spock, the way he expresses himself, with long words, elegantly and eloquently expressing himself, it was quite, I still love to try and copy it in the class to impress the teacher, So it kind of won me over straight away in lots of different ways, I think.
So young Glenn was taking elocution lessons from Mr. Spock, I see.
I was, yes. I remember one of my friends had to write a Latin essay, and in it he wrote that one of the guards was drunk, and he wrote, "Drunken and unable to comprehend the situation." And the teacher gave him a double tick, and I was going, you're just spocking it up."
So are we to trace the authorship career of Glenn to your love of Mr. Spock and his diction?
Well, it was one of the things that really showed you that there was another way of expressing yourself. It was beautifully sort of wise and articulate. And that's perhaps one of the things that led me to want to do the book of Mindfulness that I've done. But it was certainly one of the things that won me over. Mr. Spock was certainly a very original TV character. Kind of whenever he was on the screen, you would kind of... You would be captivated by what was he going to say. There was a sort of, maybe that was just a gift of his acting, that there'd be a little pause. There was always an anticipation of his lines, wasn't there? It was very clever, very, very cleverly made all round, I'd say.
Yeah, one of the things that I think Leonard did in the role was that he didn't necessarily have a hair trigger, right? Like now in television generally, there's a desire to have sort of rapid fire dialogue, sort of like I think Sorkin was really good at this in shows like The West Wing, right? That was sort of one of his things was like this rapid fire walk and talk stuff, which I find tedious and not interesting. But I enjoy the fact that Leonard seemed to always have a thoughtfulness about how he portrayed Mr. Spock. And it seemed that he actually was considering things before he spoke.
Yes, I think so. I think that's what makes it real. And also it's what creates a lot of the humor, because there was a lot of non-verbal comedy in the original series. Obviously, sometimes you get the little incidental music in the background lets you know that it's funny, with that sort of little do 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 music in the background. But there is a lot of acted face acting and non-verbal comedy with just the looks that they give each other. It's very subtle, but works very well.
Well, you started watching TOS, that ended, and did you keep up with all the other Star Treks as it became available to you over in the UK?
It's very sad because in the UK, the BBC didn't pick up The Next Generation, so we were forced to buy, get hold of the DVDs. So, you could only watch, because they costed, DVDs didn't exist.
VHS tapes.
Videos. And, it was like you would have to pay the equivalent of 3 or 4 weeks of your spending money to get to see 2 episodes of the original series of Next Gen. And I remember I had one which was Naked Now, and is it not Matter of Honor? What's the other one?
Code of Honor?
There are 2 episodes, Code of Honor and Matter of Honor. I think it's Matter of Honor.
Okay.
It was, I thought the Naked Now was really good, but I was surprised it was so much like the original series with the theme, and Kirk even gets a mention. And I thought, what are they doing? I thought they were going to do something really new, and they've just basically ripped off a whole episode. But it was very sad. It was very, very, very hard to see at first. But gradually, it became a bit more accessible to catch up with.
So as we sit here in early 2021, have you seen all the Star Trek, all 800 and something hours?
What, every series?
Yep.
No, I haven't. Big fan of the original series. I've seen those so many times. I practically know them by heart. Seen all of Next Generation, all of Discovery, lots and lots of bits and pieces of all the others, but all of Lower Decks. I haven't seen everything. I'm still working my way through, because I had a kind of period where I think I was a bit trekked out. I was like, when they started making Voyager, I was very enthusiastic about that. And then they put DS9 up, and I thought, oh, isn't that a bit like Babylon 5? I'm not sure. And then Enterprise, I loved the original idea of it, because I'd always been harboring a secret plan to propose a Star Trek series set in the early days, where somebody would ask for a tricorder and they'd wheel on something the size of a fridge, because it was, so early on in the technology. I kind of didn't really like the style of that, but then I kind of liked the 3rd and 4th series more of that. So I can't claim I'm not the most thorough. I haven't seen everything, no.
Oh, okay. Have you ever been to a Star Trek convention or a sci-fi convention?
I never have.
In your personal capacity or as an author?
No, I never have. I've been to comic conventions in my capacity as a comic writer and trying to sell comics, but I don't go to that many conventions actually. I occasionally go. I've been to a few, but it's not really my scene. But no, I haven't been. I've been to a few.
You a collector at all?
I'll show. I'm going to show you something I've collected.
Oh, okay, great. We're gonna have a show and tell. Leonard Nimoy's I Am Spock.
I was on a winter's day. I was driving around the countryside, and I came to a little town on a grey day, all in lockdown. All the shops were shut, and I peered through the shop window, and I saw a second-hand copy of I Am Spock by Leonard Nimoy, and it said signed copy.
Ooh.
So I banged on the window, and there was somebody in there, and they said, you'll have to come back after lockdown because we're closed. So I said, I shouted through the window, the name's Glenn, I'll be back for that book. And I came back straight away when lockdown was over and collected it. So I'm a selective collector of the occasional, mainly books. I like to read. I recently rebought the original Making of Star Trek book, Whitfield one from the
Whitfield book, yeah.
And I wanted to go back to the stuff that I had when I was a teenager that somehow got lost along the way, and occasionally I pick up stuff like that.
Wonderful. Have you ever worn a Star Trek outfit?
No, I haven't. I haven't been near one, but I'm trying to think.
That's okay.
Yeah, no, I can't think I have. I'm afraid not.
Oh, that's all right. One of the great things about the fandom is that people come in all different kinds of ways. Some people are fans of the show. Some people like the dress up stuff. Some people like to collect. Some people just want to talk about the episodes, and that's all okay with me. So before we get into those episodes, though, you made a mention earlier that you had written a book about Mr. Spock called How Shall We? Well, let me get the exact title here. I have it up in front of me. and it is Mr. Spock's Little Book of Mindfulness, and I had a chance to review a copy of it, and it seems to be a little bit like one of those lighthearted sort of crossover books between like pop culture with sort of an amusing dive into some aspects of something that we all love, in this case, Star Trek. Other books that came to mind when I looked at it were books that I've read, like Everything I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, which was a big one a long time ago, and The Leadership Secrets of Attila the Hun, which I bought back in, I think it was the 80s, I think. I could be wrong about that, but one of my favorite quips from that one was, every Hun has value, even if only to serve as a bad example to other Huns. So as I took a look through this book, it seems that you've taken Mr. Spock and given him sort of a humorous spin at some points. So you're going to have to justify yourself here, Glenn.
Yes, it's really taking the aspects of Vulcan wisdom and applying them to everyday life. So it's a little bit of an excuse to have fun with some of our typical modern hang-ups about relationships and social media and things, and you getting some of Mr. Spock's wise words to help people along the way, and an excuse to draw some cartoons as well, which was great fun.
I've recently interviewed another person who works closely with Eagle Moss, and that's Ben Thompson, and his books are very much deep dives into the ships and sort of technical stuff, taking Star Trek sort of on a very technical approach and appreciation. Yeah. Your books sort of have a lighthearted approach. Yeah. So we have the Mindfulness book. We also have a book about Star Trek cocktails.
I was going to say about Ben, if ever they need someone to really build the Enterprise, they just have to get him in and he'll tell them how to do it.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it hasn't been released as we talk about this, but I can tell you that we had quite a discussion about some pretty obscure ship-related things.
Yeah, he'll know how to build one.
As I picked up the cocktails book, the one thing I knew is that if there was going to be a mention of a drink related to Mr. Worf, if it didn't have prune juice, I was going to put the book down and not look at it again. Yeah. So well done for including a drink named after Mr. Worf with prune juice in it.
Good.
But I do have to ask you, what was your approach in sort of matching up cocktails to Star Trek?
Well, for a start, there was a lot of drinks that already existed in the series. That I had memories of, like the mint julep, which Dr. McCoy makes for Jim.
Well, the Georgia mint julep, which it turns out is not Georgia really a style, thing, but
So, and also there are things like the warp core breach, that Quark makes for Bashir in Deep Space Nine. So we wanted to have these drinks that the fans would know, but we wanted to have them makeable. I mean, there isn't like a definitive version. There have been versions of these drinks on sale at the Star Trek Experience or at conventions or parties or whatever. But we wanted to try and, to create versions of them that would be, would be an absolute knockout. Because we had two expert mixologists working on the book as well as me. But at the same time, we wanted to create some drinks that we wanted to exist. So there were just kind of stuff where we would invent. We would say, well, we've got to have a 7 of 9 drinks, so we had Heaven of 9, and we wanted to have stuff with Spock. So we thought there should be a Live Long and Prosper, which would be quite a healthy, relatively healthy, refreshing drink. And so there were some that we just wanted to exist. There were some that were based on the drinks that exist in the show, and there are others that are actually just well-known cocktails that associate with people, like Cisco's Sazerac, which is like a New Orleans cocktail. Mm-hmm. And we had Pike's Mojito and whatever because of the desert connection. Yeah, so there's like 3 different directions, I guess, we were coming from on that.
So I gave you some props for Mr. Worf and his prune juice, but I have to take issue with the fact that I looked at the Spock drink that you make reference to, and it's a tequila-based drink, and I don't know if this is cultural. Perhaps we'll find out. But here in the United States, tequila seems to be very much associated with college students on spring break, and doesn't exactly bring up sort of the thoughtful, logical Vulcan in me. So I don't know how I felt about that one, Glenn.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I was... in the original concept of the drink, I said this should be a kind of refreshing drink, not to create a hangover. A lot of
not for utility drinking,
sparkling water and fruit juice and stuff. But because we decided on this book that they would all be alcoholic, there should be one kind of alcohol in it. And I think it was the mixologists who said this is one where we could use the tequila. So it wasn't I have to say, I think that was a mixologist's decision. But we did look into it, and Spock has been, apparently Vulcans do drink wine on ceremonial occasions, or when it's culturally appropriate, they do drink beverages, like that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one canonical example that comes to mind, of course, is one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek from Star Trek Enterprise, Carbon Creek, where T'Pol has some wine, I believe, sitting in the mess hall with Archer and Trip. So then that's seen on screen.
Yeah, so you've got you've got some credibility to the idea that the Vulcans would have alcohol, but it isn't their trade. I mean, actually, in the introduction to the book, I point out that the Vulcans are given as an example of a level-headed people who are not associated with drinking and getting carried away. So it is stated in the introduction that that's not characteristic of the Vulcans.
Absolutely. I was pleased to see a close association of Scotty with Scotch, but I very much take Scotty to be a single malt man. And the idea of mixing single malt with anything is an obscenity. So I was very glad to see that we didn't have too much of that.
Yes.
Blended Scotches, I think people can go for it, but not with the single malts, I think.
Well, I would have to say with Scotty, I mean, we had to have him in there. And when we came across the Rusty Nail, we thought it sounded quite a kind of thing Scotty would be attracted to. And it is a cocktail made with two different types of alcohols. It's basically all alcohol. You can have it with ice, but it seems pretty strong one. I was remembering the episode By Any Other Name where he drinks the alien under the table. And so I was thinking he'd have to have something pretty strong representing Scotty.
Very, very good. So you've written a bunch of these Star Trek books. You've been watching Star Trek. You just told me you completed a rewatch or a first-time watch through, I guess, of all of Next Gen.
It was the first time I'd seen all of them because, as I told you, it was quite hard to see when it first came on in the UK. And there's been such a lot of other things to watch, even in terms of Star Trek. So I had seen a lot of them, but I found a few that I'd never seen before along the way. So that was great fun. I mean, it was a kind of a lovely voyage of discovery because it was very nice to find episodes that you just had no idea existed. And I was like, "What? They did that? I didn't realize he did that. She did that." There's the one with I'm forgetting the names now, but. Is it Conundrum? It's the one where they all forget who they are. And Riker,
oh, yes.
Riker ends up having a fling with Ensign Rowe. It is rather fun.
Which I think is that was absolutely how that would have happened. That is absolutely how that would have happened. And I'm convinced that had they not been in Starfleet, they'd have had some fiery on and off long-term romance. If they had just been working on some planet in an office somewhere, I'm sure that's how that would have happened.
There's a very nice scene at the end where Troy and they're in 10 forward having a drink, and Rowe comes down, and there's this kind of awkward, semi-comic sort of awkward conversation goes on, which is very nice, I thought.
Oh, it's glorious. Well, since we've been talking about some episodes, I think we should talk about episodes, Glenn, if you're game for it. Does that sound okay?
Yes, that's good.
All right. Well, it seems like you're a TOS type person, so let's start with some TOS. Let's talk about The Trouble with Tribbles. Certainly an episode that is memorable to a lot of people, and certainly one that a lot of people point to as an example of high-quality Star Trek. Some people say, though, it's really just a comedy episode and not of any serious import. Why is this episode particularly notable for you?
I think it's because I think this kind of captures it kind of like celebrates everything I like about the original series. It's colourful, it's witty, has the Klingons, it has the Tribbles, it has loads of great scenes. I mean, it's a great Scotty episode, it's a great Chekhov episode, it's a great Spock and McCoy episode. And Kirk, it's a great performance from Shatner. He plays a lot of the comedy against himself. He's been accused by some of his co-stars of being a bit ungenerous as an actor at times. But in this episode, kind of acts annoyed because for once he's not in charge. There's a local government official who's kind of calling the shots, and he has to follow orders. and he handles it so badly. He gets annoyed about everything. Someone says, the guy says to him, "You're not taking this crisis seriously," and he says, "No, I am. It's you I'm not taking seriously." But there's this lovely little, there's a lovely little running joke in it that Kirk is the only person who hasn't heard of Quadro Triticale. And when the guy says, when they arrive on the space station, and the guy says, "Of course you won't have heard of this new," and Spock recites every fact and detail about this grain and where it originated from. And then later on, Kirk tries to bring this up with Chekhov, hoping for some support. And Chekhov was immediately...
Chekhov knows all about it.
Claims that it was from a Russian, probably. And this joke is very nicely played by Shatner against himself. For once, Kirk doesn't know what's going on. He's a little bit out of... not out of his depth, but he's just a little bit uncomfortable in the episode. And it's not only that it's a comedy episode. I think it's just very sharply written. The plot is very clever. I mean, I love... It's a very original idea that David Gerrold had. Well, I know there was a lot of behind the scenes as well with Roddenberry, and changes were made to the original story. But it's very clever, the idea of this creature that multiplies. It looks cute, but it becomes dangerous. And this idea has been done in other forms of science fiction and other storytelling. It's a great theme because there are many things in life that are cute and wonderful, but that can become a menace and a danger to us. And I just think it's clever in so many ways. And also at the end where the Klingons poison the grain, so the Tribbles eat themselves to death. There are loads of little conceptual twists in it. And I just think it's full of funny ideas, wit. And every scene is superbly acted. There are just tiny little scenes where there's a briefing going on. And there are little niggles between the characters. It's like they really are a real world. Chekhov annoys Kirk. Spock annoys McCoy. There's a very nice, it's almost a comedy sketch where Spock goes down to the sick bay and McCoy is analysing the Tribbles. And there's a little exchange between two of them. And he says, I've come to the conclusion, Spock, that I like the Tribbles more than I like you. There's just a lovely banter about them. And you really feel that these are people that work together. They know each other. It's got that lovely lived-in quality as a show. Everything, all the elements of it are working nicely off each other. So it's not just the humor. I think it's the whole cleverness of it and the creativity of it that appeals to me.
One of the things I like about it is something you alluded to, that it gives the sense that there's a great big wider world besides the decks of the Enterprise. And there's other things happening, right? There's intergalactic intrigue. There's, minor government officials who want things done. And there's all these other things happening. And you get a little taste of that. Yeah. Which I always enjoy in Star Trek.
There's a nice quote which J.R.R. Tolkien said about Lord of the Rings, which was that unexplained vistas are part of the effect. And, he would refer to something when the characters turned up somewhere in Lord of the Rings. They always say, well, this is actually the land where in the Third Age, a great battle was here. Everything is layered. It's not just, you're not just in a place. You're in a place that used to be something else, and it makes it more like real life because the world is full of history underneath our feet. And that was, and so you get that in this episode. Yeah, you get the the vistas of Sherman's planet and the treaty between the Klingons and you get a little glimpse into a wider world. Very beautifully dramatized. It's a bit like, in a way, there are things in Star Trek that are a bit like Shakespeare, where because of limitations of budget, you often get, in the Shakespeare play, you often get a battle is just finished, it's like, and the characters come on stage and say, what an amazing battle that was, hundreds of men fighting, because they can't stage it, and you get that in Star Trek sometimes because of the limitations of the budget. You often get them having to refer to these great big things that happened before or just now, but you don't actually get to see them.
You mentioned Tolkien, and I think one of the things that pleases me about when I read Tolkien, and I'll be interested in your point of view as an author on this, is that he really does make reference to these things and then sometimes doesn't expound on them at all. And I feel like that technique is a little bit like wasabi on your sushi. You can only do a little bit of that. You do too much and it overpowers. So one example, and this is how much I know Lord of the Rings, is there's one line some character says, I think it's actually Aragorn, could be wrong about that, but somewhere in the actual first book, Fellowship of the Ring, he makes a reference to Queen Beruthiel. Never mentioned again, never talked about again. We know nothing about who that was, what she was queen of, when she lived. There's nothing else at all. And if you do too much of that, people are going to be like, he's just making this stuff up as you go along. But knowing what we know about Tolkien, he had the whole thing. He knew exactly who that was.
Well, one day somebody is going to find a Queen Beruthiel book in a box under his bed, and Tolkien will have written that somewhere. I mean,
yeah, it's all in the Lost Tales.
It creates a kind of fantastic depth, doesn't it? I like the allusions to other times, and I think it does because Tolkien was a master, of course, of inventing words that had a lot of atmosphere. Because he was a studied language. So I think sometimes he can almost tell a whole story in just one word. The word itself conveys a lot.
For sure. And I get the feeling sometimes with TV because of the production speed at which they're doing things that as an author, you have the ability to, I think, cogitate a bit more and be a little bit more intentional. But when you're trying to push out shows on these TV production schedules, sometimes they throw stuff in there that I don't know if they have given thought to what that was.
No, well, I was watching in one of the episodes, which we might talk about, of Discovery. There's a bit where someone says, "Oh no, sorry, this wasn't in Discovery. This is in Next Generation," where Picard says that he knew he was at Sarek's son's wedding.
Right. That was the episode where Sarek comes back in TNG. Mm-hmm.
What wedding was that?
Yeah, we don't know.
How many people,
we don't know.
How many people were living under the Sarek roof at the time? Maybe it was Cybok's wedding. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. We don't have any information on it, and I don't think they did either.
I want to know.
It just seemed like something cool.
Yeah, I think the implication at the time might have been Spock, or to tease the viewer that it might have been Spock. But then we later found out that Spock didn't get married, or doesn't appear to have ever got married, unless that's something that happens in some lost realm that we don't know about yet.
Exactly right. So we talked about Trouble with Tribbles, which is more of a light-hearted episode, but very well done and well executed, as you'd mentioned, with quite a number of good themes in it. But sticking with the TOS crew for a minute, one of the other ones that the M5 came up with for us to talk about was an episode that really had a little bit of a darker flavor to it, and that's the movie Search for Spock. Now, when people think of movies, the Star Trek movies, or even just the TOS films, Search for Spock is not often one that comes to the top of the list. Mm-hmm. But yet it's the one that made the top of the list for you, Glenn. So I have to ask you, what about this particular film really just put it up there for you?
Yeah, I really like this movie. I think it's quite unusual. It doesn't fulfill the brief of a lot of what you might call science fiction movies, or trying to be a crowd pleaser. I think it's quite poetical in a way. It's all about the friendships, and it has tragedy in it. And what I think of it is, it's kind of like a reverse tragedy, because at the end of it, this is a spoiler in case you haven't.
Oh, no. Don't worry about that. No. If anyone's listening to this, they've seen it.
So I think it's nice. It's kind of a reverse tragedy, because Spock comes back to life and you're basically waiting to see how they do it. It's a bit like Columbo, where you know how the merger's been done, and you spend the whole episode waiting for him to prove it. So it has that kind of reverse narrative, which I like. I think it was, for me, a very important film, because it was the first time I really felt like Star Trek was back, the original series, because the first movie felt a bit strange, although I was delighted to watch it. It felt a bit like they were trying to make a general science fiction film as well as a Star Trek film. A big concept movie, and they changed a lot of the atmosphere between the characters. The second movie felt a bit like, it's a bit of a party pooper at the end where Spock dies, and I thought, yeah, great movie, but what are you doing? You've just killed off my favorite character. So with the third film, I thought the characters were so well handled, and they were well handled for their more mature personas, if you know what I mean. I thought the way that McCoy is filmed, with his craggy face where he's possessed by Spock's Katra, it's just so superbly lit, and so the dialogue is so funny, where he's got Spock in his head, and Shatner is great. He's put through such a series of trials: the loss of his son, the loss of the Enterprise to get Spock back. And the film has just a slow creeping optimism, where you go through all this darkness, and then you get to Mount Solaire at the end, and Spock comes back, and then they play the little fanfare that from the first series. It's very very moving, I think. And I quite like it. It's a sort of sorrowing movie that ends up coming out rather upbeat at the end.
One of the things I always think about when I watch the film is Christopher Lloyd's performance, and especially setting it in the context that at the time he was known for Reverend Jim from the Taxi series. He was known for Doc Brown in Back to the Future. And I'm sure he had a conversation with his agent that said, do not bring me anything comedic. I don't want it. I've had enough. I want to do something else. Right. And boy, he sure took a turn in this one.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously you have to have a big baddie in these films to make them work. So you've got Khan, Ricardo Montalban. He's got the off the scale charisma that you need to come up against Kirk, because Shatner has got off the scale charisma. So you need to have somebody who you can obviously Christopher Plummer, who recently died. He's very, very good in The Undiscovered Country. So you do need someone a little bit larger than life to sort of act through the Klingon, through the makeup, and engage the antipathy of the audience. You kind of need him to be hated, don't you? And there is a great line where he asks for somebody. I think Kirk asks for, is it Spock or the child to be spared or to take, and he won't do it.
You should beam up the Vulcan too.
Yeah, and he says, "Why not? Because you wish it."
Yeah, it's tight dialogue, and it really tells you a lot about the character right there in that little exchange.
Well, because you often wonder when you watch a show why the baddies don't cotton on quicker to things, and in that episode, you've actually got one who does. And he's a genuine opponent, I think, for Kirk because of he's shrewd. And there are some lovely bits like when he's been attacked by the worms and he pulls it off and there's nothing happening here, kind of thing. There's a nice. I mean, I give Nimoy a lot of credit for handling the characters and the dialogue very well. It's not overwritten. It's very well dramatized. The issues at stake are very well brought to life through the people in it. And I think that takes a lot of skill. It's a lot harder than it looks, as you can see in some of the episodes where an awful lot of effort has gone into something, but it hasn't made its argument very well. But I think that film does. So has a special place for me. I felt like Star Trek is back at last when I saw that film.
Since you completed your TNG rewatch, we should talk about some TNG episodes. Let's start with Star Trek Does This Is Your Life, which is episode Tapestry. And really, it's sort of a standard, I would say a traditional storytelling approach that here comes the otherworldly being to guide you through the life that could have been. We've seen that story before, certainly. So what about this episode? What made it come to the top for you?
I think this is I think one of the very strong points in, obviously, stating what John Cleese calls the bleeding obvious here, but one of the very strong points in Next Gen is obviously Patrick Stewart as Picard. And I think one of the great regular guest stars is Q. And I just think in this episode, they're superb. But it's all in a different register because Picard is supposed to be dead, or he kind of guesses he isn't dead. But the acting is very subtle between them. There's a sort of care and concern. And there's a very nice honesty and the hard-won honesty that comes from Picard as he goes through his life and his mistakes. So I think it's a superb double act between the two of them. And I also really like the philosophical point that it makes, because if you go back to It's a Wonderful Life, it's saying, what would the world have been like without you? It would have been a lot worse. But this is actually saying a different thing. It's saying Picard thinks that he made this one terrible mistake that ruined his life, but actually that terrible mistake was a vital part of him. And when you took it away, he wasn't the same person. And it actually made me feel a lot more kind of comforted looking back at my life, because you think, oh God, I made a fool of myself there, or why did I put myself forward for that? Why did I fail at that? But it's often in our moments of failure that it makes us acceptable to our friends. Like if we never do anything wrong, if we never fail, we become pretty unbearable, don't we? And I think it's often in our disasters that we learn the most. So I thought it was quite a clever. Well, I thought it was a very clever and very beautiful kind of storyline, superbly acted, and you didn't really know quite where it was going to go. It's got lots of lovely lines in it, and it's very funny the way Q keeps turning up as a barman or something. He very cleverly they move him around the
My favorite is the florist.
So I just think it's a wise. I mean, I'm attracted to these philosophical things. I think it's a wise and thoughtful episode. There's got that quirky little thing about where Picard laughs when he's been stabbed, and it's not entirely clear if that's still a fragment of the time travel coming through, that he's pleased that he died and that his life is back to normal, because you see that at the start of the show as if he laughed the first time round, but you don't know if that's a time paradox or not. But I thought that was rather a clever little point. But yeah, it's a lovely episode, I think. They're so good in that episode that you want to see them do a kind of two-hander on stage somewhere, like... I was going to say, in the UK here, we've got a thing called Staged. I don't know if you've seen it, with David Tennant and Michael.
No, I haven't.
Anyway, it would be lovely to see the two of them on stage, ranting at each other or scoring points off each other.
There's this amazing through line, I think, in TNG, which of course is looked at as an ensemble show in many ways, but I think there is a through line of Picard's story, which if you start at Encounter at Farpoint, he's much more reserved. He's closed up. He tells Riker to, keep the kids away from me. I don't really want any of that. And he really does come across as like the high and mighty captain on a pedestal, that's sort of, I want to be sort of the strategic space leader, and I don't want to get involved in any of the family stuff and all that, and keep Wesley away from me. And, that's sort of the early season one. And then you have these episodes where we sort of pick away at that and sort of try to crack him open. And at the end of the series, and all good things, he joins the poker game, which is like the exact antithesis of the guy he was when the show started, right? He's going to hang out with the crew and eat potato chips and, play poker for matchsticks or whatever it is that they consider their scorekeeping system. So I think that this is certainly one in the string of pearls of the Picard story as you go through TNG, without a doubt.
Yeah, it's an excruciating as well when he meets his friends at the academy, and he's full of his pompous common sense, and they can't recognize him as the friend that they know. And those scenes are like...
The thing that jumps out at me at those scenes is, I always appreciate the acting, and you get these two really young actors who got to hold themselves against Patrick Stewart in this really sort of bizarre scene that you can only really get in sort of sci-fi fantasy type movies where, it's the older guy back as his younger self, right? Glorious.
I think they handled it quite cleverly, because Q says you're the only person who sees you as you are. So they just cover it in a line of dialogue, because I think it would have been very awkward if they'd given him a wig, or it would have been very distracting if they'd tried to age him down. So it is a bit like a play in that sense, that you have to suspend your disbelief big time while you're watching.
Certainly.
It. But you feel included in the joke. It's like, as a viewer, you feel included in the fun of that, the dark fun of that episode. And I don't
exactly
know.
Right.
I like that. Do you like that one? Is it not one of your favorites?
Oh, no, I think it's glorious. I think it's fantastic. I think for my own life, I've had some spectacular failures. I can think of at least two. And I don't mean moments where I was embarrassed or did something foolish. I'm talking about like something really major in my life crashed and burned in a very sincere and profound way that caused a lot of upset and changes. And now, as I sit here as a middle-aged guy, I look back on those and I hold them near and dear to my heart. They made me do things differently later on.
I think it's a point well made, and so I really like episodes of Star Trek that you learn something from, as long as it's done in that very beautifully dramatized way, not overtly preachly done. I think that's it's done cleverly through the use of Q. And I think that shows you what a great character he was. He was the rogue element in the Next Gen that reminded you of the madness of the original series, and he did give it a bit of flair at times, perked up the series at times when it needed a little bit of madness, in the mix.
The next episode I want to talk about is interesting in that I think it's tied to the previous episode in a way, and that's Measure of a Man, Season 2, Episode 9, which a lot of people refer to as a Data episode, but I think that that's actually incorrect. Data is really a prop in the episode, which when you consider the purpose of the episode, it's really the most perverse way to think about it, but I think it's actually true. It's much more of an episode about Picard in a way than about Data. But I'd love to know your take on that.
I suppose this is like, when I saw this episode, it was the first time that I really believed that The Next Generation could be as good as the original series. I was basically very loyal to the original series. I was quite upset that they didn't make them when they came up with the new Star Trek in the 80s. I was really upset that they hadn't used the original cast, and I was in quite a profound sulk about it. And when I saw this episode, I thought, well, actually, this is superb drama. You know, the characters were so well drawn, especially Picard and Data. And Maddox is very good in the episode, and he's very good as an annoying character. And I just thought the dialogue, the tension, you know, there's no space battle, there's no punching, there's no aliens. It's all the subtleties of what do you believe and how do you feel about that. And it's also very clever because up to that point, the character of Data had been almost a kind of toy in the series, a lovable little tin man who we could pull a few jokes with. Suddenly in this episode, it's completely flipped on its head, where you have this tragedy of someone saying you could just take him apart and not, I won't say not care whether you could put him back together again, but suddenly you have this danger that of losing him for an experiment. And it suddenly throws this very dark complexion upon that character. And I thought that was very clever. And I thought the kind of battle between Riker and Picard is interesting, because up until this episode, I always thought of Riker as being a bit of a fifth wheel in the program. I wasn't really think, why do they need him there kind of thing? What does he do? But in this episode, you saw him as a formidable opponent for Picard, and it made you care about the outcome. You really wanted, obviously, you wanted Picard to win the argument. But Riker showed how resourceful and dangerous he could be as an enemy if he ever was your enemy. So I thought it brought him to life as well. So I just thought it's beautifully lit as well. I was watching that episode. I thought the scenes have actually got some of the beauty of the original series. The colouring of and the lighting of the original series, I think, is superb. And I was watching that episode, and I was just thinking, the way the scenes are set up, the way they're lit, is actually very, is lovely. Also, so just as a piece of television, I think it's great. And who doesn't love a courtroom drama?
Yeah, which I have to say, as someone who was in the Navy, when ships are out at sea, that's actually how it works. You may not have a JAG officer, you may not have a legal staff, and so the officers actually do conduct court-martials. That is actually how it can happen under certain circumstances. Now, that wasn't a court-martial; it was a hearing. It was a little different, but I found it to be plausible as someone who was actually in the Navy.
I did wonder if in the original version, but because they introduced the character of Philippa, Picard's old flame, I did wonder if in the original story, perhaps because he talks about her conducting the court-martial about the Stargazer against him, if he had to go up against her, and then Roddenberry, because he was very keen on utilizing the core cast, shoehorning them into the stories so that they were always happy, they got enough lines and enough to do.
Right.
I wonder whether the original script didn't have him going up against her, and they said no. Let's use somebody else, let's put Riker in. But they still keep her in the story as a kind of framing device, which works rather well, humanizing Picard and her. So that's a little question mark I've got about that one. What was in the original version?
As we record this, I'm working my way through the Mark Cushman books. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but he basically did a really deep historical analysis of the original series all the way through, right up until the motion picture. So he's not into TNG, but if you wanted to know what William Shatner was doing in 1974, and what the negotiations were and how much he was paid to do whatever on animated series, a lot of that is in his books. They're not novels. They're historical collections of moments in time of what's been happening throughout Star Trek. And he goes through all the episodes and talks about the changes in scripts and what the original stories were and who got mad about what happened and, all kinds of crazy stuff. So I don't know if that exists for this particular episode, but I'm sure that information is out there waiting for us to discover it someday. Maybe Mark will do TNG season 2 someday and we'll be able to find out.
It would be interesting to know. Anyway.
Now we're going to take a big jump. Let's move into the modern era of Trek. Let's talk about Star Trek Discovery, season 1, episode 3, Context is for Kings. An episode I was really taken with. I knew going into it that the first 2 episodes were sort of a prequel to the show. I think that had been let out somehow to the fandom, that they weren't going to do flashbacks. They really just wanted to give us everything sort of in an encapsulation. And those 2 episodes, and the show itself was going to start with the 3rd episode in a way. And I was really taken with this episode, mostly because I wanted to find out what the heck was up with this guy, Lorca. So mysterious. Something really dark was going on that ship. And it certainly led somewhere I didn't expect. But I have to know from you, what about this episode made it to come to the top of your list?
I really like this episode. I mean, I feel like I'm on the brink of a fantastic dark journey. When I watch it, it seems to, it should have probably been the first episode of Discovery, but you had to know why Burnham was apparently a mutineer and why she was hated. It was an interesting decision that they decided to create all the backstory and give you it as the first 2 episodes, because to me this is where it begins, and it's a wonderful episode. It's full of a very modern, disconcerting atmosphere. Of when they, she's traveling on the prison transport at the start, and the people there, it's very un-Star Trek. There's no respect. People are making fun of her, and then the pilot, who is supposed to be a reassuring figure, goes out to solve something, and then you see her drifting past the window, and there's a sense all the way through of danger and darkness out in space. And it's interesting, later on in that episode she quotes Alice in Wonderland, because it is a very Alice in Wonderland episode. It's that you're seeing the Discovery through Burnham's eyes as she comes on board the ship, and she comes up against prejudice, dislike of her. Even the person who wants to be friendly with her, Tilly, is a bit manic and strange. She doesn't know, they have kind of unfriendly scenes. There's a little hint of friendship, but there's a kind of discomfort there. And I absolutely love Lorca was such a good character, and it's kind of playful the way there's a little Tribble in that scene. But he's very captivating. His lines are very strong. He gives a wonderful argument for her joining him, and the context is for Kings. It's very clever. So it introduces Lorca. You've got Tilly. You've got Stamets. He's brilliant in that episode. He's so arsey with her. He's so sarcastic and superior. I mean, I've worked with people like that. I know that Stamets type, very likable underneath, but on the surface rather difficult and superior. And I just thought, introduces great characters, brilliant casting, great performances. And I love the Ripper, the giant tardigrade that, and the eerie scene on the Glen where you see that Klingon and just saying shush, and then he's killed. I mean, it's full of really clever moments. I think it's just really contemporary. It's very modern, very dark, but very, very creative at the same time. Lots of great lines. And I really like that, and I feel I like the whole of the first series of Discovery a lot. I felt a little bit like it never was quite as good again as that 3rd episode. That was my perfect moment, where Discovery had it all came together in the 3rd episode of season 1, and then to me it never quite been quite as good as that again. But I do love that episode.
One of the things I feel as I look back on Discovery, especially the early parts of it, is that it was obvious to those of us in the fandom, given the delays in production, the multiple people who were in and out of the show, that there's just a lot of chaos that was happening in the production behind the scenes. And I'm not taking any sides on that. I don't really have any dogs in that fight, to use a term. But it seemed that there was just a lot of chaos behind the scenes. And I think I like
that term. I'm going to use that term. I don't have any dogs in that fight. I'm going to remember that one.
It's actually pretty hackneyed. I probably should come up with something a little bit better, and it's a little bit insensitive of me. I should come up with something a little better. But I don't think that it could have gone any other way than show up in the eventual show, that there were some things that didn't quite pay off. There were some problems that had to have come up in the show itself, because there was just a lot of changes behind the scenes and a lot of chaos that was happening in the production. So I think that's probably a story that will be told 10 years from now, and we'll probably have a little bit more illumination on that than we do at the current moment. But
it does feel a bit like Discovery is a show which is constantly discovering what it's about, and it goes one way, then it goes the other way, and then turns another corner, and you don't really know quite what you're going to get when you, especially with each season. The seasons change dramatically.
Yeah, they are pretty wildly different, I think.
I love that. I just like the darkness of the first series, and I was very disappointed that what they did with Lorca, because I really wanted him to be the captain. I thought it gave the series a really strong captain, even if he had a dark side. I was very disappointed that the way they turned him out, the way it turned out at the end, took him. I thought you've taken away your best character there, really. For me, in that series, you've kind of thrown them out with the storyline. And I thought they were going to do a flip in season 3 when they had the Guardian of Forever, and they went into the mirror universe, and Georgiou was allowed to go back into her own timeline and change things. I thought, wouldn't it be great if they used this as an opportunity to get Lorca back? They could have changed time, and he could have come back, but they didn't do it. But I was hoping they were going to do that.
Well, I don't want to spoil anything, but I do want to say that there is a canonical reference to Prime Lorca in one of the books. So they did hint at something. And I'll leave that for interested listeners to go explore on their own, or you can send me a message on Twitter, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction on that. But Glenn, I really want to know, after talking about your books, your involvement with Star Trek over your life, these episodes that we've talked about and why they're special, I want to know why Star Trek matters to you.
Why does it matter to me? I mean, I suppose it's one of the things that came out while I was doing Mr. Spock's book of Mindfulness, which was that in a kind of sometimes depressing world, where when you look at the news, you think, why are people so stupid? Why can't people just get along? Why governments make so much obvious mistakes? Why is there so much ignorance in the world? There was something about Star Trek. It seemed to offer something really optimistic, but in a not preachy way, in a funny, enlightened way, and I think it was something about those conversations between Spock and McCoy, those arguments about what was right or wrong. It just seemed to offer something intelligent and an optimistic, another way of doing life, rather than the one that we have. And so it asserted something different, another way of living, and another way of an optimistic, articulate, imaginative response to life, which was very attractive to me.
Well, Glenn, I've enjoyed our conversation, but the M5 is signaling me that it's time for the Kobayashi Maru.
Oh my God, I'm ready for the Kobayashi Maru.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little show here. Are you ready, Glenn?
I'm as ready as I will ever be.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Glenn's responses.
Working. Simulation loaded and ready for use.
Mushrooms with Reno or the green stuff with Scotty?
The green stuff with Scotty every time.
You must battle to the death. Will it be Vulcan style with the Lirpa or Andorian style with the Ushan Tor?
I think it's going to have to be with the Lirpa Vulcan style.
You need medical care from Dr. Phlox in sickbay. You can get either the Regulan bloodworms or the Edosian slug.
I would definitely go for the slug. I've had the bloodworms, so it wasn't great.
Which runabout was best? The Ganges, the Yangtze Kiang, or the Rubicon?
I'm going to go for the Yangtze Kiang.
Check out Kaminar or swing by Zahia?
Kaminar.
Very good. Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Results posted.
Glenn, I am pleased to tell you the M5 has determined that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Well, I'm relieved. I never thought I would pass the Kobayashi Maru.
Well, there you go. And now the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our show. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Glenn is awarded the title of Federation Cultural Attaché to Bajor.
So there you go.
Wow, I can see there being a lot of interesting kind of official parties and receptions I might meet some nice people there.
Absolutely. And, you'd have to wear a fashionable earring, I think. Glenn, please tell people how they can get in touch with you and continue the conversation. Where can they find your books? Where can they follow what you're doing?
Follow a lot of what I'm doing through Hero Collector. So you've got the Hero Collector website. I've got my own website, glenndakin.com, basically www.glenndakin.com. And I'm on Twitter just under my own name, and all the other places, really.
Fantastic. Glenn, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and wide-ranging conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your warm hails of friendship, your maddening memoranda of malevolence, or samples of your Thomas Riker folk songs to feedback@trekprofiles.com, or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send me may be used in the show, or it may be horribly mangled in a transporter accident. Some of the lightning round questions in this very episode were written by listeners Adam Sanders and Corby Hill. I thank them for sending those in and encourage you to send me your very own questions for possible inclusion in the show. This time, I leave you with a quote from Dr. McCoy, who in the movie Star Trek III said to Spock, quote, "I'm going to tell you something that I never thought I'd hear myself say, but it seems that I've missed you, and I don't know if I could stand to lose you again." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
What I do is I really interview fans about why they love the show. And so when we talk about things like the episodes, when we talk about all that, it's really about you. Like, what is it about this particular episode that appeals to you personally? It gets kind of boring if we just have the same different people on and they all go, yep, Devil in the Dark's a great episode. It's just fantastic. It's fantastic.
That's the problem, is that inevitably there are certain episodes that stand out that you think if you only choose obscure episodes, you're going to come across as a bit attention-seeking, maybe. So it's obvious that you're going to like some of the better episodes, but I tried to make it a little bit broader, but I guess mine are fairly predictable.
Yeah, no, but that's okay, because what I will want to get into with you is why those episodes matter to you.
Yeah.
As opposed to just some objective standard of
high quality.
They're great Star Trek.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about those things, but that's not the main focus.
Okay.
So we may chat for a moment or two, depending on how we feel in the moment. It's okay. But then we go quickly to question one, which is always the same question, which is, are you a Star Trek fan?
Okay.
You must confess. If you cannot confess, we shall go no further.
That would be quite funny. Well, I don't suppose that will ever happen, but one day someone will just panic and say, "No, I'm an imposter."
Well, I was having this discussion the other day on Twitter with some people, and I had on the show Noah Averbach-Katz, who was, of course, a guest star recently in Star Trek Discovery, but husband to Mary Wiseman, who's on the show. And I told him, I was like, I don't care if you've been on the show. That's not enough for me to want to interview you.
No, of course not, because
right.
They'll have anybody on Star Trek. It's the people who like it, who understand it, really.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in is the fandom, right? So if there have been people on the show who are like, yes, I'm a fan. When were you a fan? The day I was cast.
Is he the one who got shot? Is he the Andorian who got shot?
Yeah, he's dead now. But that's the great thing about Star Trek. There's aliens.
She had to shoot somebody to show she was bad.
Yeah, but he can always come back.
Of course,
he can always play himself. He can play under other prosthetics.
There are lots of ways I can see for him to come back, especially in Discovery, which is a kind of freewheeling Alice in Wonderland end of the Star Trek universe.
And then if we don't explicitly talk about it, the question will come up towards the end, which is, why does Star Trek even matter to you? I mean, you're spending a considerable amount of you're an independently published author. You know, you have other books that you've published, right? I'm sorry, I know that's not the right term, but
no,
you've published.
I'm just laughing why that someone would achieve some individual greatness where they didn't want to watch television anymore. I don't think there's anybody around like that. But anyway.
But and then you're devoting a considerable amount of time to writing Star Trek books of various kinds.
You know what? In lockdown, I watched last year I watched the whole of Next Generation from start to finish.
Oh, that's glorious!
Every single minute, even Shades of Grey, even the episode. Well, actually, the only one I cheated a little bit on was with the Riker episode where they have flashback scenes, and is it the end of season 2?
Shades of Grey. The writer's strike. It was kind of like a problem there.
I kind of got up and walked around the room a little bit in some of those scenes because I thought, so I didn't watch every minute of every episode, but I nearly did. Shades of Grey just beat me slightly.
Well, you know, it's if when you're binging the show, you've already seen the episodes that all those clips come from, so it's like
technically you have. But if you watch Shades of Grey properly, if that was the only episode of Star Trek you'd ever seen, it would be a shame. But anyway.
And it wasn't on TV where I was, and so I only had 4 episodes on a videotape that my friend got me, and I just watched the same 4 episodes over and over again.
That is what it was like out here. I mean, you won't believe it. I mean, it was so hard at times to watch Star Trek. It was just a wasteland. You know, there was a set of Star Trek picture cards of what a Little Girl's Made of, and like just being able to look at those picture cards was the closest you could get to knowing what the series was like. You know, for a while. But anyway, let's get on with it because my family would expect me. My son has got me on a fitness crusade, and he wants me to go for a run.
Oh, good. All right. You know, my listeners submit these questions, so some of these came from listeners. Just so you know, I originally did them all myself, and now I get people who send them in to me. So some of those were listener submissions, which is great.